Hey everyone, Fareed here on the Rational Fareed. All our ideas about right and wrong, good and bad, are they just stories we tell ourselves? Or worse, commands handed down from somewhere we can't even verify? For a long time, especially as science has given us incredible answers about the universe, there's this nagging question. If you strip away tradition, religion, all that, where does meaning come from? Where do morals even fit in? Maybe you've heard the argument that science is cold, sterile. It can tell us how things work, sure. How the stars burn, how life evolved, even how our brains fire. But can it ever tell us how we should behave? Can facts ever lead us to values? It's one of the oldest criticisms thrown at atheists, isn't it? This idea that if you don't believe in a higher power, if you don't have some divine commandment handed down, well, then where exactly do your morals come from? Are they just relative, subjective, made up? And honestly, it's a fair challenge. For a long time, especially within what some called the New Atheist movement, there was a real focus on deconstructing religious claims about morality, knocking down the old walls, so to speak. But some felt there wasn't always a clear plan for what to build in their place. Then you hit the big philosophical hurdle. The one famously pointed out ages ago. Science, logic, reason. They can tell us how the universe is. They can describe gravity, evolution, the chemical reactions in your brain. But can they ever tell us how things should be? Can facts ever generate values? Can science bridge that infamous is-ought gap? It feels like a moral vacuum, right? Like science is brilliant for understanding the cosmos or curing diseases. But when it comes to figuring out right from wrong, it just shrugs. But what if that perception is wrong? What if science could actually give us a grounded, rational, non-religious basis for morality? What if it's not about finding some sacred text or ancient tradition, but about understanding the fundamental nature of conscious experience, based on some really compelling arguments out there, particularly the line of thinking laid out by people like Sam Harris? It seems not only possible, but maybe even inevitable. And in this video, I want to walk you through how that argument is constructed, piece by piece. Can science really tell us how to be good? Let's find out. So if we accept that challenge, figuring out a non-religious, non-arbitrary way to talk about right and wrong, where do you even begin? If we don't have rules handed down from on high, what's our starting point? Well, one way to approach this, and I think it's a powerful one, is to say, there's really only one thing you absolutely have to grant for objective moral truths to even get off the ground. Just one basic premise. And that premise is this. The absolute, ultimate, worst possible misery for everyone is by definition bad, undeniably bad, fundamentally sucks. Think about it, like putting your hand on a red-hot stove. Seriously, picture it. That intense searing pain, is that experience bad because some book tells you it is? Because society arbitrarily decided heat damage is undesirable? No, it's bad because it just is. It's an immediate, undeniable, aversive state of conscious experience. Now, scale that up. Way, way up. Don't just think physical pain. Think emotional torment, soul-crushing despair, intellectual degradation, pointless agony stretching out forever for every single conscious being that could possibly exist. Imagine a state where suffering is maximized in every conceivable way, with absolutely no silver lining, no lesson learned, no future hope, no relief. A state of total, utter, meaningless misery for everyone. If that state isn't bad, if you can't point to that and say definitively, yes, that is bad, then what does the word bad even mean? What could possibly be worse? It's the bedrock. It's the absolute bottom of the barrel. So, if we can agree, just for the sake of argument, that the worst possible reality, filled with the worst possible suffering for everyone, is truly bad, and I'd argue it's impossible to coherently think otherwise, then we have our starting point. We have one fixed point on a moral map. From here, we can start to ask, well, what moves us away from that, and what moves us towards something better. And that leads us to a crucial distinction about subjective experience itself. Now, I can almost hear the counter-argument forming. But Fareed, you might say, pain, happiness, misery, well-being, aren't these all just feelings? Aren't they purely subjective? My pain is my pain. Your joy is your joy. How can you possibly make objective claims about something so personal, so internal? And that's a really important point, one that trips a lot of people up. But I think there's a crucial distinction we need to make here. We're confusing two different ideas of subjective and objective. Yes, the experience of pain itself is subjective. It happens inside a conscious mind. It's a first-person phenomenon. Philosophers call this ontological subjectivity. The very nature of the thing is that it exists within consciousness. You can't experience my toothache, and I can't experience your headache. But here's the key. Just because an experience is ontologically subjective doesn't mean we can't make epistemologically objective claims about it. Think about it. We make objective claims about subjective states all the time, even in science. It's an objective fact that when you touch a hot stove, you subjectively experience pain. We can measure the heat, observe your withdrawal reflex, scan your brain, and see activity patterns correlated with pain. We can objectively state, Fareed is subjectively experiencing pain right now because he touched a hot stove. The claim is objective, even though the experience is subjective. Or take a different kind of example. I can state as an objective fact that Winston Churchill, in the last hour of his life, was not subjectively thinking about buying tickets to a Taylor Swift concert. That's an objective claim I can make about the subjective contents of someone's mind at a particular time, based on everything we know about Churchill, history, and, well, Taylor Swift concerts. The subjective experience, what he was thinking, is inaccessible to me directly, but my statement about it is objectively verifiable or falsifiable. So when we say something like, extreme pointless suffering is bad, we're not just expressing a personal preference like, I don't like olives. We're making an epistemologically objective claim about the nature of that particular subjective experience for conscious beings. It's a claim grounded in the fundamental way conscious minds process and recoil from certain states. Science, by studying minds, brains, behavior, and social systems, can give us objective insights into these subjective states, what causes suffering, what alleviates it, what contributes to flourishing. This distinction is critical because it allows us to build a bridge. We can start from undeniable subjective experiences like suffering and well-being, and then use the objective tools of science to explore, understand, and navigate them, leading us to what you could call a moral landscape. With that in mind, we can start to visualize what this means for morality. Imagine, if you will, a kind of conceptual space. Let's call it the moral landscape. This landscape represents all the possible ways conscious beings, individuals, groups, even entire societies, could experience life. On this landscape, there are definitely high points and low points. At the very bottom, the deepest valleys, you have those states of unimaginable suffering we talked about, the worst possible misery. Up towards the peaks, you have states of flourishing, well-being, fulfillment, connection, and positive experience. The key insight here is that these aren't just different states. They are objectively better or worse states relative to that bedrock of suffering. Moving towards the peaks isn't just a matter of personal taste. It's moving towards states demonstrably characterized by less suffering and more well-being. Moving towards the valleys is moving towards states characterized by more suffering and less well-being. And guess what? Science is uniquely positioned to help us map this landscape. Disciplines like neuroscience, psychology, sociology, economics, even behavioral science, they are constantly gathering data about what leads conscious beings, both individually and collectively, to experience different states. What causes suffering? What alleviates it? What conditions allow people to thrive? What policies lead to healthier, happier, more stable societies? What kind of actions erode trust and create misery? And what kind foster cooperation and well-being? Science is essentially giving us the tools, the maps, and the compass to figure out where we are on this landscape and, more importantly, how to navigate it. It helps us understand the causal relationships between our actions, our circumstances, and the resulting states of conscious experience. And, because there are objectively better and worse states on this landscape, states of greater or lesser suffering and well-being, it means there are objectively better and worse ways to move around on it. There are right and wrong ways, in a factual sense, to go about maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering for conscious creatures. So this isn't about finding absolute moral commands written in the stars. It's about using our best tools, the tools of science and reason, to understand the consequences of our actions and choices on the well-being of ourselves and others within this vast space of conscious experience. But okay, even if we can map the landscape, how does that bridge the gap from knowing what is, what causes well-being, to what ought to be, what we should do? That's the famous is-ought problem, and it's the next big piece of the puzzle. It's the famous is-ought problem, often attributed to the philosopher David Hume. The argument goes, you can state all the facts you want about how things are, the scientific descriptions, the measurements, the causal relationships, but you can never logically derive a statement about how things ought to be from facts alone. Just knowing what causes suffering doesn't automatically tell you that you should reduce suffering. How do you jump from is to ought? This is where this science-based approach to morality looks at that philosophical guillotine and says, okay, let's actually tackle this head on. There are a couple of ways this connection can be understood. First off, even when we're just dealing with facts, even in science itself, we already operate with implicit values. We value logical consistency. We value evidence. We value simplicity when explaining things, like Occam's razor. We think that if you're trying to understand the universe, you should follow the evidence. You should be logically consistent. These are oughts, built into the very process of seeking truth. But more directly, when talking about morality and this landscape of well-being, terms like should or ought can be seen as incredibly useful shorthand. They're not necessarily pulling us into a totally different non-factual realm. Instead, they're describing actions or states that reliably move us towards the peaks of well-being and away from the valleys of suffering on that moral landscape we talked about. Think back to the hot stove example. If your hand is on a hot stove, and I say you should take your hand off, am I pulling some arbitrary moral command out of thin air? Or am I simply using shorthand for a factual description? My statement, you should take your hand off, is equivalent to saying, taking your hand off the stove will reliably move you away from the objectively bad subjective experience of severe pain and tissue damage, and towards a better state where you are not experiencing that. It's like in arithmetic. If I ask you what 2 plus 2 is, and you say 5, I'd say, no, 2 plus 2 should make 4. I'm not making a moral judgment about the numbers. I'm stating a fact about how they relate within the system of arithmetic. Should make 4 is shorthand for 4 is the correct, valid, and desirable outcome within this system, based on the rules of addition. In the context of the moral landscape, saying you should reduce unnecessary suffering is shorthand for saying reducing unnecessary suffering is an action that reliably moves conscious beings away from an objectively worse state, suffering, and towards an objectively better state, well-being, on the landscape of conscious experience. Avoiding the worst possible misery isn't just something people happen to dislike. It's something we should avoid because it's an objectively terrible state, and moving away from it is objectively better. So the ought isn't disconnected from the is of conscious experience and its causes. It's a way of talking about effective navigation towards demonstrably better outcomes within the space of what conscious minds can experience. But even if we accept that, we can map this landscape. This is where the social aspect comes in. While the argument starts with the undeniable badness of universal suffering, it doesn't just stop at maximizing your own personal pleasure. The truth is, for most of us who are, clinical psychopaths, caring about other people isn't some difficult moral hurdle we have to force ourselves over. It's pretty much the default setting. We are, by our very nature, profoundly social creatures. Our brains are wired for connection, for empathy. We experience the suffering of others, not always directly, but in ways that are uncomfortable and motivating. And we experience joy and well-being through our connections with others, our friends, our family, our communities. A massive chunk of what contributes to your well-being comes from positive interactions, trust, love, and cooperation with other people. What's more, the well-being of individuals and the well-being of society are deeply intertwined. It's not a zero-sum game where you have to take from others to increase your own well-being on the landscape. Science, again, steps in here. Studies in sociology, economics, public health, conflict resolution, they consistently show that policies and actions that reduce suffering and increase flourishing overall, things like reducing poverty, improving education, fostering peace, building strong communities, don't just benefit some abstract greater good. They generally create a rising tide that lifts most, if not all, boats. Creating a society with less violence, less despair, more trust, and greater opportunity makes the landscape better for everyone on it, including you. Conversely, actions that increase suffering and reduce well-being elsewhere, perpetuating injustice, spreading misinformation, engaging in violence, tend to make the whole landscape more treacherous, and that negatively impacts your own potential for well-being. So caring about others isn't just a feel-good suggestion tacked onto a scientific morality. It's a practical recognition of our interconnected reality as social beings living on a shared landscape of conscious experience. Navigating effectively towards the peaks of well-being means navigating together. Science helps us see why this is the case by showing us the causal links between social conditions and individual flourishing. This framework gives us a powerful, evidence-based reason to be concerned with the state of the world and the lives of others, not because a rulebook says so, but because our own well-being is fundamentally tied to the health of the entire system. Which brings us to the core conclusion. So, to bring it all together, the idea here is that morality isn't some mysterious realm outside the natural world, governed by ancient texts or arbitrary opinions. Instead, it's fundamentally about conscious experience, specifically how to minimize suffering and maximize well-being for conscious beings. The incredible potential lies in the fact that science, our most powerful tool for understanding reality, isn't silent on this. Far from it. Science, through fields like neuroscience, psychology, sociology, and many others, is precisely the tool that allows us to map this landscape of well-being. It helps us understand the causes and consequences of different states of conscious experience, both for individuals and for societies, because states of suffering and well-being are real. They are aspects of reality that we can, in principle, investigate objectively. This means that there are facts about how to get from the valleys to the peaks. There are objectively better and worse ways to live our lives, to raise our children, to structure our societies, if our goal is to maximize flourishing and minimize suffering. We don't have all the answers right now, of course. The moral landscape is complex, and our maps are still being drawn. There are still difficult questions, edge cases, and areas where we need more data. But the possibility of finding objective truths about how to live, truths grounded in the well-being of conscious creatures, is absolutely real. Science, in this framework, doesn't just describe the universe. It provides the map, the tools, and the understanding needed to navigate towards a better world, one built on a foundation of measurable, undeniable well-being, rather than inherited dogma. It gives us a rational, evidence-based path to figure out what is truly good. What do you think? Does a science-based approach to morality resonate with you, or do you see different challenges? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this exploration interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to The Rational Fareed for more discussions like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.